Hi, my name is Allie. I'm here to read you a story once again. Today we're going to read part of a chapter book instead of a picture book like usually. Today I want to read something a little bit spooky. It's called Bunnicula, A Rabbit Tale of Mystery by Deborah and James Howe. This book I read when I was a little girl. Been around for a little while. It was published in 1979. And there are some pictures in it. It was illustrated by Alan Daniel. And I was thinking that I would read an excerpt, which means a little part of the story to make you interested and want to read more. So it's not right at the beginning. It's a little bit that's exciting so that you get interested. If you are interested, there are so many more Bunnicula books. Once you read this one, you can keep going. And if you're not ready for a big chapter book, there are also early readers. So let's get started. Our main characters that tell the story are Chester, who is a kitty cat, and Harold, who is a doggy. And they live with Mr. and Mrs. Monroe and their sons. And one night, they bring home a rabbit that they found at the movie theater. And the movie that they were watching at the movie theater where they found the rabbit was Dracula. If you don't know about Dracula, Dracula is a vampire. I have these. These are kind of spooky. They're pretend vampire teeth. Maybe you'll wear some for Halloween underneath your mask. I think that you'll like the story. Let's get started. One morning, Chester, that's the kitty, had news. That bunny, he whispered to me across our food bowls, got out of his cage last night. Don't be ridiculous, I said. How could he break through that wire? Look how little he is. That's just it. He didn't break through any wire. He got out of his cage without breaking anything or opening any doors. I looked puzzled, so Chester told me the following story. Now, Harold, he said, I don't want you thinking that I'm not a good watch cat, but after a few hours last night, I grew curious about the time. I went into the hallway and, you know that new clock they've got, the big one that goes all the way to the ceiling? Well, see, it has this thing in the middle called a pendulum. And at first, I figured I would just leave it alone. It looked like that spool they tied on a string and hung from the doorknob for me to play with when I was a kitten. Every time I hit that silly spool with my paw, it would swing back and hit me on the nose. I hated that toy. So naturally, when I saw this one, I decided not to have anything to do with it. I checked the time. It was midnight. I was all set to go back to the living room when something stopped me. Curiosity, I ventured. I suppose you could call it that. I preferred to think of it as the challenge of the unknown. I put one paw over my nose and reached out the other one and gave it a good smack. I darn near broke my arm. It's still tender. See how swollen it is? He showed me his little paw. I couldn't see anything wrong, but I knew better than to argue with him. Oh, yes, I said. That looks terrible. You must be suffering awfully. You'd better go easy today. Harold is a good friend. He's a nice dog. He limped dramatically, just far enough to display his new handicap, and continued. I couldn't even get to the pendulum. Somebody had put glass in front of it, and I was pretty mad. I was all set to go back, but at the same time, I couldn't help watching the thing move back and forth, back and forth. It was so easy to watch, and before I knew what had happened, I was waking up. You fell asleep? I asked incredulously. I couldn't help it. I didn't even know it had happened, but I looked at the face of the clock, and it was 12:45. I had been gone 45 minutes. I ran back to the living room, looked at Bunnicula's cage, and it was empty. I couldn't imagine where he was. Then I noticed a light coming from under the kitchen door. I went into a crouch, stalking the light, when, click, I heard the refrigerator door close and the light went out. It must have been Mr. Monroe having his midnight snack, I suggested. No, that's what I thought. I jumped on my chair, curled up real quick, kept one eye open, pretending to be asleep. Slowly the door of the kitchen squeaked open. This little head poked out from around the corner and looked to either side to see if the coast was clear. Then, guess who came bouncing out all by himself and with an idiotic grin plastered all over his face? Well, I guess it wasn't Mr. Monroe, I said. Not unless he wears bunny pajamas and gets very tiny at night. Bunnicula, huh? You got it. Unfortunately, I hadn't positioned myself so that I could get him back into the cage, and I didn't want to let him know that I had seen anything, so I had to stick put. I still don't know how he got out or back in. At this point, Mr. Monroe came downstairs to make breakfast. I wondered if Chester hadn't dreamed the whole thing. He did admit he'd fallen asleep, and, as I've said, he has quite the imagination. But I was game. After all, there hadn't been any excitement in this place for days. Chester and I took our positions under the kitchen table. Didn't have long to wait. Holy cow! Mr. Monroe yelped as he opened the refrigerator door. He took this funny-looking white thing out of the fridge and held it at arm's length. Peter, come down here. What is that? I whispered. Beats me, Chester answered. It looks like a white tomato. Very funny, I said, as Pete came into the kitchen. Peter, have you been playing with your chemistry set in here? No, Dad, why? I thought this might be one of your experiments. Do you know what this is? Gee, Dad, it looks like a white tomato. Just then, Mrs. Monroe and Toby came in the door. What's all this fuss about? Mrs. Monroe asked. We were just trying to figure out what this is. Toby pulled it down so that he could get a better look. Well, he said, it looks to me like a white tomato. Mr. Monroe took a good, long look. You know, he said to his wife, it really does look like a white tomato. There's only one way to find out, said Mrs. Monroe, who was always the practical one. Let's cut it open and see what's inside. Everybody gathered around the table. I jumped up on a chair, and in all the excitement, no one noticed that I had my paws on the table, which, under normal circumstances, was discouraged, to say the least. Chester wasn't so lucky. Chester, get off the table, Mrs. Monroe said. Chester jumped onto Toby's shoulders, where he stayed to view the proceedings. Mrs. Monroe took her sharpest knife and cut cleanly through the thing. It fell into halves. It's a tomato, all right, said Mrs. Monroe. Here are the seeds. But it's all white, Toby observed. And look, said Pete, it's dry. So it is, Mr. Monroe said as he picked up one of the halves. There's no juice at all. Well, Anne, what do you think? It's gone bad, I guess, though I've never heard of a tomato turning white before. Come on, she said, clearing the table. Let's throw it out and have breakfast. And Harold, get your paws off the table. Rats. Chester jumped down from Toby's shoulders and motioned for me to follow him into the living room. This had better be important, I said. They're cooking bacon. A white tomato. Very significant, Chester murmured. So it's a white tomato, I said, edging my way back to the kitchen door. What does that have to do with Bunnicula? I'll tell you one thing, Chester said. I got a good look at that tomato. There were very suspicious marks on the skin. So, I believe they're teeth marks. So tonight I'm going to reread a book I read last year. How fascinating, I said, as the aroma of frying bacon wafted across my nostrils. And what book might that be? The Mark of the Vampire. Chester thinks that bunny rabbit, Bunnicula, might be a vampire rabbit. What do you think? Did that tomato get all white? All the juice sucked out of it? Did it just go bad? Or do you think that bunny might have a spooky secret? I don't know. You'll have to read more of the story to find out. And if you like that, there's more where that came from. So many more books by James and Deborah Howe. Real quick before we end today, I want to remind everyone, sign up for our Bunnies Book Club. Take home a bunny to read to. And you can sign up by coming into the library during our public hours, or you can go to wcdpl.readsquared.com and sign up. You can read to your bunny and track your minutes, and there's also some fun bunny missions for you to do. All right, thanks for joining me. I hope you enjoyed Bunnicula, and I hope you're inspired to do some more reading of your own. Thanks for listening. Happy Halloween.